Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to week 11 of GCH 426, Emerging Infectious Diseases. This week, we are going to talk about land use, climate change, and globalization. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but the world is getting smaller, right? There's more people. It's easier to travel from one place to another. It's just an interesting time to be alive. And speaking of the world getting smaller, I apologize if you hear something in the background. That's my neighbor driving around in a golf cart because that's how we do it here in Maryland. So let's get started with the lecture this week. We're going to talk about globalization, climate change, etc. You have optional viewings on YouTube. The couple of videos here: when cities were cesspools of disease and the effects of urbanization on health disparities. Require reading. So those YouTube videos are optional. You need to read because I will pull questions for the final exam from and the quiz from this paper on communicable disease, information, health, and globalization in the interwar period. And then also Spillover, 13 Gorillas, and From When Germs Travel, No One's Idea of a Tropical Paradise, Haitian Immigrants and AIDS. And then I'll give you, at the end of the lecture, you'll see the discussion prompt number 6, which is due on April 16th, 2023. So land use. We're going to talk about land use and what could happen if you don't use the land properly. You can have spillover events from closer context to animals. You can run out of resources like water, places to put your sanitation, your trash, your sewer, etc. We're going to talk about climate change and how tropical diseases are expanding their range. We're going to talk about cases of Vibrio in particular and what's going on with that. Infectious diseases from natural disasters and natural disasters making things worse. And then globalization, travel and human migration, commerce and black market trafficking of animals. So land use. This map is from Our World in Data. They do great work on getting data from different sources and putting it together in visualizations. So as you can see here, the world is projected to hit 10.9 billion, around 11 billion people by 2100. So in a little bit over 60 years. By 2050, we're going to be at 9.7 billion. And we are right now, we're past 8 billion. So there's a lot of people. and the rate of growth, as you can see there in the line, it has been increasing, but now it's been dropping. And why has it been dropping? Well, it's been dropping since the 1950s, 1960s, because things are getting better around the world. I know that it's hard to believe that during a global pandemic, with a country in the United States as divided as we are politically, that I can say that things are getting better. But yes, things are actually getting better. There's less communicable disease, although there's plenty of it to go around. Other than the war in Ukraine, that is like the one major war, but there are some flare-ups here and there around the world that are still important, that still need to be addressed. But we don't have wars going on as much as we used to. The biggest threat right now to humanity is in the form of natural disasters and pandemics. Climate change is also another one of those existential threats. But because things have been getting better economically and things have been getting better with infectious diseases being, if not eradicated, eliminated, at least with vaccines, and because of industrialization and the availability of more and better ways to live, you have this decline in population because when it used to be that you had to have 6 kids so that 3 of them may survive and run the farm for you, you had 6 kids and you had more children. With better economic circumstances, you have less children, and so you can see this in the graph. That's what's happening. Most of the growth in the world is going to happen in Africa. Africa is, and many of the countries in Africa are developing nations, and so that is what we mean by developing. They're still developing. They're still growing. Latin America is slowing down, Southeast Asia is slowing down, and then the developed world, they're definitely slowing down. There's a lot of places around Europe that have a negative growth at this point, so they're actually dropping in population, as is Japan. I think I talked about that earlier in some other lecture. Life expectancy. We're also living longer, and so you live longer, and you take up resources that are not being used for younger children. So here in the 1800s, you had life expectancy around the world was 29 years. That was the average globally. So think about that. If you were born in 1800, you were expected to live only until 1829. Who lived the longest back then? Very wealthy, very affluent people who had access to clean water, maybe some sort of medicine, the smallpox vaccine, and that was it. Everybody else, not so much. 1950 comes around. This is after World War II. More industrialization, more medicine, more vaccines, more public health work, etc. And as you see, the developed nations in Europe, Western Europe, which got less devastated by the war than Eastern Europe, and North America, right? You have this jump in ages in life expectancy. So if you were born in 1950, you're expected to live till 2018 in Canada, the United States, and parts of Europe. But as you can see, the developing nations in Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, still low life expectancy in 1950. Things kind of really got better in 2015, and again, more access to medication, more access to sanitation, clean water, less war, better economic outlooks. And so here is what that results in. If you were born in 2015, you're expected to live to 83 in Spain, 82 in Canada, 79 in the US. Look at Latin America. Look at the progress between 1950 and 2015. There's even progress in Africa, right? Look at Australia. Australia went from 69 in 1950 to 83, on par with Western Europe and Canada. So again, progress is happening, and this brings on its own special set of challenges when it comes to emergent infectious diseases. Why? Because when you're very old, you are more susceptible to infectious diseases, right? To getting sick and dying from them. So these are some of the challenges that you're going to be seeing. Something interesting is happening though in the United States and in the United States alone. So you see the life expectancy has declined since 2019, 2018, 2019, and now it was at a high of about 78, almost 79 years, and now it's 76.1. Comparable countries, so developed nations with similar sized economies, similar per capita rates of GDP, etc. They had the dip for the COVID pandemic that we saw all around the world, but now they're rebounding, and we have not. Why is that? Well, the United States has issues. We have more guns than people, and access to those guns to people who are not responsible gun owners, and children who don't know how to handle weapons, and you have access to firearms also in people who are suffering from depression and other conditions that might make them more victims to self-inflicted wounds. We also have higher rates of maternal mortality because of disparities within the maternal mortality or between the maternal care. There are states right now that are getting rid of insurance coverage for children. There are places where there's just a lot of disparities going on, and that shows up in this, that the numbers are going down, as well as the recent very steep climb in cases of fentanyl opioid overdose. So everything is coming together, and we are seeing it now in this graph. Special challenges for the United States. The rest of the world saw the dip for COVID-19, and they're doing better, but the U.S. has just a lot of things right now stacked up against all of us here in the U.S. I want to bring attention to the growth of cities around the world. Dubai in 1990 looked like this at the top of this image. Desert, maybe a few high-rise buildings. They were probably apartments or government buildings. Not a lot of people. Just a very remote place. Not a lot of people went there either. All of a sudden, the Emirates decide to become a hub for economic activity and for tourism, and they invest a lot of the money from the oil from that part of the world into making Dubai into the city that you see in the lower half of this image, with high rises, very tall buildings, lots of roads, lots of not artificial, but greenery that really shouldn't be there in that part of the world, and water. And I think I saw an estimate that about 8% of the population in Dubai are local born citizens. The rest are immigrants from other parts of the world that have gone there to work. So that is interesting if you imagine that you have 92% of the 92% of your population coming from other parts of the world. What are they bringing with them, right? And with regards to infectious diseases, of course, they're bringing culture, they're bringing economic activity, but what are they bringing with them in infectious disease as well? China has a lot of cities undergoing the same process. Here you have the city of Yiwu in 1984, population 73,000. By 2016, population 1.1 million. And you see the growth of this city. There's a river that goes right through the middle there, so cities tend to go where the water is, and you see the growth here on the right. So this is from a satellite image. So you see the growth of the city. And where the growing city, the city goes into areas that are previously uninhabited, contact with animals that have not been seen previously, and you have issues of spillover events because of that. Here you have another city here in the United States. This is Las Vegas, and you have these two satellite images side by side. 1990 in the left-hand side, and you see Las Vegas, what it looked like in 1990. Reasonably smaller than the one on the right, which is just the last year. So the city has really grown, and as you can see, the lake there on the Arizona-Nevada border has gone much smaller because all that water has been going to the use of water in Las Vegas. And so this brings its own issues again, not just of contact with wild animals, but now you have the issue of water insecurity. Probably other services, other goods and services are going, they're having to be rationed, and that causes its own problems. So again, growing cities, growing population, people moving into cities and out of rural areas. This is causing its own set of issues when it comes to infectious diseases. So with bad land use, when you don't do it right, when you grow out of control and you're not planning it, you're just growing without any regard to where you're growing into, you have closer contact with wild animals. And so when that happens, you have situations like Ebola and other hemorrhagic fevers. You have situations like COVID and other respiratory viruses, because these are spillover events, right? These are animals that harbor these viruses, and in those animals, they're relatively harmless or not as pathogenic, and then they jump over to humans and they become very pathogenic. Rabies, you saw this in Europe with rabies. That's what was going on over there in Europe, was that the domesticated animals like cats and dogs would get out of their homes and go out into the wilderness and encounter a rabid fox or a rabid coyote or a rabid wolf, and then come back into the city with rabies and give rabies to the people. You also have ticks and other arboviruses and arthropod-borne infections, and we talked about this right last time with Lyme disease, Chagas, and babesiosis. So a lot of issues there as well. This article on the right-hand side, this screen capture of an article, How Cities Shape Epidemics. It's an interesting article if you want to read it. It talks about how a high number of people in a small area, overpopulation, causes epidemics to just flourish, because then diseases can jump easier between persons. Then you have the lack of adequate resources: drinking water, sewer and sanitation, long distance to travel for preventative and primary care, because if you're building homes, you're building buildings, you might not be building the hospitals and clinics that you need as well. So that is an issue. And then the overcrowding, like I said, is you're just going to have a lot of people packed in together, like you see in this picture of these men in a room. I count 6. How many do you count? In a rather small area, and they're sharing all these tenements in New York City, and that's what causes epidemics to go through the cities. Population density. So we think of some countries as being overpopulated, right? We usually hear about India and China, but when you talk about when you adjust for the land area, yeah, they're very densely packed. But the most densely packed places in the world are, you see in Central America. There's some of them there. The Caribbean, those islands, a lot of people living in small islands. You have the United Kingdom. You have places in Europe. And Singapore is a little city. It's a state. Actually, here it's at the bottom of this part of Southeast Asia. It's a city-state, and so it is very densely populated. There's a lot of people there. When COVID went through, it went through like wildfire, even though they try to implement as many of the interventions as possible. It really just it was impossible to control. So take a look. Take a look at the situations that could be coming together. Right, high population density, overcrowding, low socioeconomic status, and you have a recipe for something bad to happen in those places. This is where I grew up, you guys. This is the border of El Paso, Texas, and Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. I grew up there between 80s and 90s, and then in 2000 I left and came up to Pennsylvania. But the lower valley, when I lived in Mexico and in Ciudad Juarez, I crossed over when I was 10 years old legally. Before that, I did it as an undocumented alien to go to school in El Paso, but that's a whole other story. But finally, when I was 10 years old and was allowed to come over with documentation, I went to live in the lower valley, which is this part on the map here where it says Socorro. Socorro, that's where I lived, and it's called the Lower Valley because it's on the Rio Grande goes and splits this large metropolis into two cities and two countries, right? And so it's on the valley of that, and it was cheap, very cheap land that used to be farmland, and so the farmers started to sell it for people to build homes, and it exploded. A lot of people build their homes first as mobile homes, very low income housing, and then they slowly, over a couple of generations, got enough wealth together to build homes. But there was no where I went to school in Socorro, Texas. There was no sewer, and there was no running water. We had to get water from the well, and we had to use cesspools. Also, there was pesticides from the farmlands that had contaminated the air, water, and soil. And when the pests were scared away from the farmland right across the street, they went into the houses. So there was mice and there were insects as well. It was very, very far away from hospitals and health centers because none were built down there. There were maybe one or two little community clinics, but if you really got into trouble, you had to drive the 45 minutes into the heart of El Paso to get kind of that kind of care. This was not the case when I was living in Juarez. On the Mexican side, I lived in a home that was a 3-bedroom home. We had running water, we had sewer. We didn't have the economic advantages that we enjoyed once we came over, so we traded some of that to live in the lower valley. So it was an interesting experience growing up, living in this community made up of immigrants and migrants. And with it, with this population, we had people who were had active TB, tuberculosis, or latent tuberculosis. And we had a lot of things. I've told you about my experience of testing positive and then having to go get my antibiotics when I was in college at University of Texas, El Paso. So, and then the tropical diseases of Chagas from people crossing over from Central America, arriving this. I misspelled growing here in 2023, but yes, by 2023 it was urbanized and growing. I went down there to visit, and it was highly urbanized. Places that did not have running water now had running water and sewer, etc. It was growing. There's a Walmart. There's other big stores and more high schools. I did notice that there were more schools in the area. It used to be just a one school at Socorro High School, and now there's all these other schools as well. So what happened was that the conditions that were there a generation ago when I was there now have moved downriver, down southeast of there to the more lower part of the lower valley. So it just seems to be the case that when a city is growing, the center is the hub, and then as it grows out, poor housing turns into medium income housing, and then then the poor housing moves outward from there. So you see this repeated over and over again in a lot of cities. So climate change. As I've told you before, there is no doubt. The science is very clear that the world is undergoing some sort of climate change that is very, very fast. Certainly not at the scales that we have seen or that we know of from previous ice ages, previous climate changes that have happened. This is happening in the blink of an eye, really. Waters are getting warmer, places are getting warmer. There's other places that are getting colder. But that's what we call climate change. The climate is changing, not the weather, but the overall climate of the planet is changing. And so here we have a situation that the water is getting warmer, and this warmer water is allowing Vibrio species bacteria, Vibrio bulnificus, and if it sounds familiar, it's because cholera is Vibrio cholerae, so they're cousins of cholera. And these bacteria like to grow in brackish water, which is salt water with a little bit of fresh water. And so you see them concentrated in places in this image. Sorry, let me go back. You see them in Houston. You see them at the mouth of the Mississippi River. You see them in Florida, where there's a lot of wetlands, right? A lot of brackish water. The Chesapeake Bay here, where we are, if you're around George Mason, we're right here in Washington D.C. metro region. There's a lot of more of these cases, and what Vibrio does is it can make you very sick on its own, but it can also cause you to have these flesh-eating infections. So it gets into a cut. You are otherwise immune suppressed. You get into this brackish water, maybe for a swim, maybe to go fishing, and what ends up happening is that the bacteria get into your wounds, and it matters if you're immune competent. This is happening mostly to people who are immune compromised, but now we're seeing it more in immune competent people. So people who are otherwise healthy, they're getting these infections because the dose matters. So they're getting a big wallop of the bacteria. Malaria, we talked about it, right? The mosquitoes are expanding their territory almost 3 miles a day. I showed you the maps previously. That is just happening. There's mosquitoes in places that there shouldn't be mosquitoes because they are not dying over the winter because the winters are relatively mild. I don't know if you noticed this winter here in the DC metro region, very mild. We had hardly any snow, hardly any very hard freezes. It certainly didn't get to the minuses like it has in years past with regards to the cold. And so that has allowed mosquitoes to not die as much over the winter. We will see a lot of arthropod-borne infections. Unfortunately, this coming summer, we're going to probably see a lot of Lyme disease. We're going to see a lot of West Nile virus. We might even see some Chagas, babesiosis, etc. So again, the climate is changing and it's causing these diseases to pop up. So again, like I said, this is change that's happening. It's not necessarily warmer. Some places will get colder, but on the average around the world, the globe is getting warmer. And that warmer means better survival for the pathogens and their vectors, and more severe weather to disrupt services and utilities. We saw it just this week with the tornadoes happening all over the South. And when that happens, then what you end up having is a lot of people that are being exposed to infectious diseases, either when they're trying to clean up. There's disruption in the water systems and the sewer systems. They might have tetanus from cleaning up and getting a cut with a rusty nail. They might have conditions exacerbated by lack of access to healthcare because the hospitals are overwhelmed with the number of people who are injured or who need to be taken care of. And then when you're not sleeping in a place and you're suffering from all that stress, when you're not sleeping in a permanent place, that stress as well messes with your immune system. So a lot of issues there with this warmer weather that is causing more severe storms, and unfortunately we'll see stronger hurricanes and stronger storms like these happening because of climate change here in the US and around the world as well. You saw it I told you about cholera in Malawi with Tropical Storm Freddy hitting them. Very, very strong, unprecedented storm hitting Malawi, a landlocked country in Africa. So think about that a little bit. Like, how do you have, right, a tropical storm hit a landlocked country? I mean, the country is relatively close to the sea, but it still was impressive to see. So how do we mitigate this? Disease surveillance and quick action. So we need to be aware of these things happening. Where are they happening? How are they happening? To whom are they happening? The epidemiology of these diseases, and then act quickly to mitigate their impact. Education for communities at risk. So telling people who are immune compromised, maybe you shouldn't go swimming in brackish water that has been warm all winter and now is warm in the summer, and that Vibrio is there. And then build resilience in people at risk. Resilience doesn't mean that you can withstand the stress. Resilience means that you come out of the other side of the stress better than you went into it. So building that resilience is allowing people who are at risk, that if they experience these things, to come out better on the other side and be better prepared. Ideally, we would reverse the trend, right, and stop climate change from happening, but we're probably too late. We're probably going to have to deal with this for the long run, and then we reduce and eliminate the risks as best as we can. We'll see how that goes if everybody can get their act together. And the last part is globalization. So this is an image I took from Google Maps. This is if I was to travel from Ethiopia to Washington D.C. Dulles International Airport on a flight from Addis Ababa, it would take me about 17 hours by plane. I would probably have a stopover in some place in Europe and then come over to DC. I don't think there's any direct flights, but I can be in Ethiopia in less than a day, and I can be here from Ethiopia in less than a day, or really any part of the world in less than a day because of air travel. So air travel has changed things. People can now travel the entire globe in a matter of hours, not a matter of days. And with those people, diseases can travel when germs travel, right? And so we must be mindful of that. And just like that, you can also sit in a plane with somebody who's infectious and get sick. They were sitting there for hours next to you in a relatively small space with a lot of people. Think of it as overcrowding of a different sort, and you just manage to infect a lot of people. Global shipping as well. You can order anything from anywhere in the world now, and it'll come to your house delivered. At least if you live in a developed nation, it's a little bit trickier in developing nations, but nevertheless, you can have in that shipping a vector from tropical areas to anywhere in the world. So the mosquito, DC had a couple of cases of malaria that people couldn't figure out how they got malaria because these people didn't travel outside the U.S. And what ended up happening was that the mosquito with malaria had taken a trip in a box of bananas from Central America and arrived at Dulles and got out and gave people who worked there malaria. You can also have a human and animal migration. So people are escaping disasters, war, poverty, and they're usually disadvantaged and a higher risk for infectious diseases, right? And people are very smart. They'll get through borders. Diseases don't care about borders, and people who really want to get away from those situations also will find a way to get around borders. And so it's a little bit of a tricky situation to try to control people from traveling. So what do? You have surveillance for diseases. You make sure that vaccines are available in all parts of the world. Also medical interventions, that there's no inequity, so that at least if they have to pick up and leave because of war or famine or something bad happening, they are at least not infectious. They're not carrying any infectious disease. So this week's prompt for you guys. This week, I want you to go to the discussion forum, and it will be due on April 16th, 2023. I want you to write one multiple choice question about any of the infectious diseases we've covered so far. And then you write the possible answers, marking the correct answer with an asterisk, and I have an example here on the slide. So what is a causative agent of whooping cough? A. Bordetella pertussis. B. Mycobacterium tuberculosis. C. Measles virus. D. Influenza type A. And I marked the Bordetella pertussis as the correct answer with the asterisk there before the A. And so I want you to please put it in this format so that I can use it for the exams. There's about 30 of you in the class. I will choose the 15 best questions that I see in the discussion forum, and I will use those in the final exam. I will not tell you which 15 I picked, but you will have access to all the questions posted on the forum, right? And so you can study from that for the final. And it'll be please do on the April 16th. That way I can start incorporating it into the final exam that I'm starting to write now. Some reminders. Next week, we're going to talk about war and conflict, Ukraine, East Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Americas. We're going to talk about drug-resistant tuberculosis coming out of Ukraine. And so there's the optional video that you can watch to kind of get primed to that. Required reading, the establishment of CDC Global Rapid Response, Rapid Response Team to ensure global health security, from the Emerging Infectious Diseases Journal, and also from When Germs Travel, read Chapter 1, Facing Tuberculosis. Again, I apologize. I know that we are jumping around in these books, but it's just necessary because of the way that the class is being put together. But I hope that you've all been enjoying the two books so far, and it's giving you food for thought as you go into your public health career. And then next week, I'm going to open quiz number 5 on April 10th, and it is due the last day of school on May 15th. So quiz number 5. You should have 4 quizzes by now. 1, 2, and 3 were due with the midterm exam on March 20th. Quiz number 4 opened last week, and it will be due at the end of the class. Quiz number 5 will open next week, and it will be due at the end of the class. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time. I hope you are staying safe and staying healthy. And if you have any questions, you know how to get a hold of me. Please do not hesitate to contact me if you have any questions about the course. if you have any questions about what we covered today. And that's it. I'll talk to you next week. Thank you.